tell us a little bit about what you can glean from the latest polling data, because we haven't had very much since the dreadful events of Saturday. What does the one poll we've had out since then tell you? It wasn't one of yours, but you've got some thoughts.
No, I mean, I think what it's showing is actually not much movement. And I think although terror attacks in Western countries often benefit the government of the day, to be honest, I think in Britain we're just getting used to them, unfortunately and sadly. And so it seems to be sort of priced in. People have formed their views of Jeremy Corbyn, they formed their views of Theresa May and the Conservatives, and they're pretty much sticking where they were before, which suggests, of course, that the race has tightened, but Theresa May should probably increase her majority in the House of Commons tomorrow.
How much would she increase it by? Because it's difficult to turn the percentages into seats, isn't it?
No, you're absolutely right, and I think on that, the forecast, my own guess, might be anything from a small increase to quite a large one. And the reason for that vagueness is that there is no simple relationship between the percentage of votes you get and how many seats you get. In the past, Tony Blair got 36% of the vote and managed a 64-seat majority. One time, David Cameron got 37% of the vote and was 20 seats short of a majority. So it really depends where they are. And a big question in British politics is what has been happening in the marginals. And looking at where the leaders are campaigning maybe gives you some thinking about how the detailed private polling they might be doing.
Well, that's interesting, because we've been running a couple of stories here at Bloomberg which have been around that very subject. Theresa May campaigning very much in the Labour heartlands that voted Leave, clearly thinking that she can try and tap in to some of that Brexit support. She sent Boris Johnson to one of those places yesterday. Does this suggest then that they're hearing different messages on the doorstep? Maybe things they're hearing lead them to believe the polls are not as tight in those crucial seats?
Yes, I mean, and I'll defend my industry, but we have, as an industry, overrepresented Labour more often than not. So it may be that the Conservatives are slightly further ahead than the polls are suggesting, particularly in the marginals that matter. Because if all the Conservatives' resources have been focused not on piling up votes in safe seats like Kensington and Chelsea, but instead are, in the places that matter, these places perhaps that voted Brexit but are quite working class, not traditional Conservative areas, then we may be very surprised on Thursday night when the exit poll comes out.
Indeed, it's quite difficult this time to work out where that UKIP vote goes, and that's part of the problem, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, most of it, to be honest, does go back to the Conservatives. I mean, and that's one of the reasons why you can see the Conservatives, despite Labour rising a bit in the polls, have just been flying along at an altitude, to be honest, that in conventional British politics, before the collapse of UKIP and the non-resurgence of the Lib Dems, would have seen them with a huge majority. They're at the level that Tony Blair was getting in 1997.
In percentage terms?
In percentage terms.
Right, that's an interesting idea, interesting dimension. Is turnout going to be one of the crucial factors here, and particularly turnout of young voters? Because you've mentioned the overstatement of Labour by pollsters in the past. Maybe that's one of the differences that we're seeing between the polls, because there's a big range of polling at the moment, isn't there? The Conservative lead is anything from 1 percentage point to 12, and maybe some of that is to do with assumptions about turnout.
A lot, because the question really is, do you believe the young people that you're speaking to? And the young in general elections in Britain in recent years have tended not to bother voting. 44% only bothered to vote in 2015. But what we have seen over the last cycle of elections is in 2015, 2016 and now in 2017, all pollsters, including Ipsos Mori, are seeing a marked rise in young people telling us they're going to vote. Whether they actually will or not is the $60 million question, and we'll find out. But, depending on how you decide to treat them, if you decide to think that they're just lying, then you weight them down and you get a much, much closer result, or even in some scenarios, Mrs May actually losing 1 or 2 seats. If you think actually they're enthusiastic but they're confusing Facebook, Instagramming and going on Twitter with actually voting, then, we'll see.
So is it different this time in the sense that the young people who are saying their vote, that in itself is different to previous rounds?
That is different, and that's part of the surge in Jeremy Corbyn's ratings and indeed the rise in votes for the Labour Party. And it may well be that we do see a rise in votes for the Labour Party, but Mrs May's still winning handsomely. So this is pretty uncertain stuff. Talk
to me a little bit about the battle in Scotland, because the SNP did astonishingly well in 2015. Yeah. It's theirs to lose in a sense then, isn't it, in Scotland? Yeah. And it's the battle for second place that's fascinating.
Yes, and I think the evidence there is, at the moment, that the SNP clearly will win a majority again, but they are going to lose seats. And at the moment, if the polling is to be believed, and I like to believe it as a pollster...
And if you don't, then,
yeah,
you know...
There is a problem. Actually, Mrs May should pick up some Conservative seats. And you've got to remember that in living memory, the Conservatives held half the seats in Scotland. So it's certainly not beyond the bounds of reason. And again, the parties there, the Labour and the Conservatives, juicing it out for second place, but probably the Conservatives are going to pick up more seats than Labour.